have your Bibles this morning, turn with me to the book of Judges. It's right after Joshua. It's in the Old Testament. The book of Judges. Last week we went through chapter 13, and today we're going to be going through chapter 14. And then next Sunday, chapter 15, and then the following, chapter 16. Chapter 16, I'm really excited because Kevin's going to be preaching on this, and he's going to be sharing with you guys. So, man, you guys are in luck on that. So as you're flipping there, let me ask you a question. If you met a superhero, what kind of advice would you give a superhero? You ever thought about that? Last week we talked about superheroes and how society and culture has these superheroes that are filled with great strength and great abilities. But if you could speak into the life of a superhero, what would you say? What would you do? You know, I don't know any Spider-Man fans in the house. Anybody Spider-Man? Yeah, not so much. He's kind of borderline. Oh, there's a couple. Sorry, Blaine, no offense. See, Spider-Man is one of those superheroes. This young guy, Peter Parker, gets bitten by this awesome spider, and he develops these abilities, man, to spin webs and to shoot and to climb and to jump and to do all these things. His name's Peter Parker, and one of the Spider-Man movies, the one I think was the first one, Peter Parker was having this contemplation. Should I continue to be this superhero, continue to do what I've been given the ability to do, or should I just run off with the love of my life, Mary Jane, and just be happily ever after? And so it was that struggle he was in, and as he was in that struggle, he remembered something his uncle told him. He has a clear mind, and he's understanding, and he's remembering exactly what his uncle said, and his uncle told him this: with great power comes great responsibilities. You guys ever heard that? You remember that? With great power comes great responsibilities. Now, these words aren't true just for superheroes, but they're true from real life. How many leaders in our country or across the globe could really benefit from that kind of advice? With great power comes great responsibility. I was looking up some different articles online trying to find some of our world leaders living in opulence, and February 18th, 2004, I read an article from the World Post. They partnered with Huffington Post, I believe. But they ran an article that is exposing the opulence of North Korea and their leaders. Now, North Korea, when it was, it's currently ruled now by Kim Jong-un, but before that was his father, Kim Jong-il, who was a crazy guy, right? But he was crazy to the point where he loved luxury. Like, he loved luxury so much that the budget for every year when he was in office as president and as ruler was about $300 million of the national budget was just to fill his luxuries, his nice gold tubs and exotic foods and his top of the line luxury. So Kim Jong-il was a pretty guy that was a guy that loved his luxury. But his son was even worse, and the article said in 2012 the national budget was $645 million or $0.8 million that was spent solely on Kim Jong-un and his family when it comes to luxury items. You know, and I bring this up, well, one, because they're lunatics, but two, is because this country of North Korea, it's not a major world power. Most of their country is dying of starvation every single day. And so here you have this president, this ruler, this dictator that's living on such a great life of opulence and luxury, while yet millions and millions of his own people are starving to death, literally. See, with great power comes great responsibility. And it's not just North Korea. This is true for many, many world leaders all throughout time, all across their globe, how they failed to live up to their responsibility because they lost focus and they started living in their lavish luxury. So last week we started this short series and we looked at the everyday battle between God's purpose and man's plans. And we looked at the life of Samson. Now, Samson, we hear about in Sunday school stories, was this great man that God used him mightily. But Samson had his hang-ups. He had his struggles. And as what we're going to see last week in chapter 13, we learned that, hey, Samson was a man that was chosen by God to do some extraordinary things, some really great things in life. His responsibilities for God was way up on top of the list. But what we're going to start uncovering in chapter 14, 15, and 16 is we're going to see the reality of his lifestyle. Samson was born with great responsibility. He was blessed by God, chosen by God. Even before he was born, God had already spoken to his dad and his mom through an angel saying, hey, look, your son is going to be special. You don't have to flip there, but in chapter 13, verse 5, this is what it's saying it's going to be of Samson. He said, you will become pregnant and have a son whose head is to never be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazarite, dedicated to God from the womb. He will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines. So God is saying, your son is going to be a Nazarite, not when he gets older, not when he can make his own choice, but from birth. Even while he's in the womb, he's going to be completely set apart, because I'm going to use him to lead my people, the Israelites, out of the captivity and slavery of the Philistines. So what's a Nazarite? A Nazarite was someone that was devoted to God, who was to live a completely set-apart lifestyle. Someone that would live their life in such a way that they made a vow, and in these vows there was 3 unique identifying marks about a Nazarite. 1, they were never to have any kind of alcohol. No fermented drinks, no grapes that were on the verge of being fermented, no kind of alcohol whatsoever should ever touch his lips. A second commandment or a vow of the Nazarite was to touch no dead bodies. You couldn't be around any kind of dead body. You couldn't touch a dead body. You couldn't do anything. And then lastly, you were to never cut your hair. You were to never once get your hair cut at all. And again, it's the 3 S's. No sake, no cemeteries, no scissors. Remember that. I'm just kidding. I understand cemeteries is a C. I get it. And what we find, God was going to use him to save Israel from the captivity of the Philistines. Samson had great power. He had great purpose. He had great potential. His life was already called out by God. God was already writing Samson's story. But as we read, we're going to quickly find out that things change. So the end of chapter 13, Samson's born, he's a baby, but the beginning of chapter 14 spans quite some time. The start of chapter 14, he's already old enough to start marrying. So his hormones are raging. Apparently he's a good-looking guy. He probably looks like me, to be honest. He's strong, he's fit, he has it going on. And then what we start seeing here, there's 2 main things I want us to look at as we look at chapter 14. We're going to look at one main point, and then I'm going to prove to you why this point is true, and then we're going to see another main point, and I'm going to prove to you why that point is true. And the first main point is this. The most unlikely candidate to lead God's people was Samson. The most unlikely candidate to lead God's people was Samson. Now, as we read through chapter 14, Samson almost pretty much had everything going for him. But then you quickly realize, man, this guy, he's making quite a bit of mistakes. He doesn't really have it going on. So we have to answer that question. So what makes him the most unlikely candidate to lead God's people? Well, here's the first flaw of Samson. He goes to places he shouldn't be. The first flaw of Samson, he goes to places he shouldn't be. Let's look at chapter 14, verse 1 and 2. Just a note here. I had computer problems, so I don't have the verses print out, but I do have the points. So if you have your Bible or Bible app, just read along, that's fine. Judges chapter 14, 1 and 2. Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he turned, he said to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now go get her for me as my wife. It says that Samson went down. Now, I think the author, when he's writing this, yes, he's alluding to his geographical movement. He went down to Timnah from where he was. But I think he's also paralleling the spiritual reality that Samson is about to ensue on. Not only is he physically about to go down to Timnah, but spiritually, he's starting on this quest of going down spiritually as well. He went down to Timnah. Timnah was a thriving Philistine city. It was a major city. It was a big-time city. There's tons of Philistines there. So here he is. He's going down. So all right, you got this chosen man of God, this man that's going to lead Israel out of the captivity of the Philistines. He's going down to Timnah. Okay, so what we're expecting to see is a scene from Braveheart. We're expecting to see this man show up and just start slaughtering people, right? But that's not what we see. Actually, what we see is quite the opposite. This guy has marriage on the mind, and he's looking for him a wife. He's looking for someone to marry. So what he does, he sees a good-looking Philistine woman, and he falls in love with her. Or he falls in lust with her, however you want to look at it. But the problem is, he's looking for love in all the wrong places. All fine girls, no ugly faces. He's looking for love in all the wrong places. And he knows this. He wanted to get a wife, but this isn't where he should be starting. This isn't his fish in the sea. This isn't where he can just throw it out and see if he gets any nibbles. He shouldn't even have been in the first place. See, Samson knew the words of God written down from Moses years ahead of him. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 3 through 4, this is what God says about marrying people that are not like you. He says, "Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons. For they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods, and the Lord's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you." See, God gave the Israelites clear, specific instructions on who they were to marry. Now, it's not like God hates other people. It's not like God is like, you're too good for them, like they're below your class. Like, that's not it at all. See, what God was doing by making this law for Israel, he was expressing to them some great love. He says, because if you intermarry these other people that worship these pagan gods, I know your hearts. And your hearts are going to start being just like them, and you're going to start worshiping these false gods, and you're going to completely abandon me. And so in order to protect you from losing your first love, don't intermarry. That's what we see, that God clearly says in the Old Testament. See, God knows his struggles that the people would have. But Samson, he was driven by his hormones. He was driven by his passion. He knew what God's word said. He knew what he was supposed to do, but his actions were completely different. So he goes down there, and although he's never spoken to her, although he knows nothing about her other than she's extremely hot, what he does know is that he has to have her. Regardless what God has to say. Regardless. Look at verse 3 of chapter 14. His father and mother replied, "Isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among all our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me. She is right for me." Some of your versions might say, "She's right on my eyes," or "She's right with my eyes." See, Samson's parents aren't pleased. Samson's parents are upset at their son. They're like, "What are you doing?" And I imagine what this looks like. Now imagine Samson running home, "Mom, Dad, guess what? I found the woman of my dreams." And now imagine the mom and dad like, "Okay, all right, tell me about it. So, what's her name? Who are her parents? You know, like, we want to know, let us know." Then he's like, then they ask, like, "Well, where is she from?" And he's like, "Timnah." And you could probably almost see like the expression of the parents like, "Huh." It's like a gut punch of like, "Timnah? Did you just literally tell us Timnah? You mean the Philistines' Timnah? Have you lost your mind?" I can see this going on. It's like, come on, there has to be someone else, Samson. What about the girls in our neighborhood? What about the girls that are like us? What about Jessica or Mary? We know their parents, they have good jobs, they're successful people. What about them? And I can almost feel like Samson trying to justify it and trying to hide it and trying to get his way done. He's like, "Mom, but don't worry. This girl's parents have a good job. They're bakers." "Well, how do you know they're bakers?" "Because they made a cutie pie," right? Because she's good looking, right? You know. See, it doesn't matter. He wasn't having it. He didn't care what his parents had to say. That's a good one. Young people use that, right? Keep that when you're in high school. So what we find is Samson's parents are like, no, this can't be the case. There has to be someone else from within us. You know what God says. You know what God says. And Samson's like, I don't care what you say. Go get me my woman. I need this girl. See, his parents was giving him godly counsel. His parents was encouraging him in the Word of God, saying, hey, it's not about, you're a set apart man. Like, God has a purpose for your life. And if you marry her, it's not going to end well, because we know history. So go get somebody. And he's like, no, she's right in my eyes, which means she's fine. She looks good. He's trying to describe it, and he's trying to persuade her parents, but her parents are old-fashioned. They just can't understand. He's like, Mom, you don't understand. She's like a parking ticket. She's got fine written all over her. And they're like, what's a parking ticket? I don't know. I don't get it. But see, what you're going to find, this is one of Samson's many mistakes. His desire to marry a woman that God forbade him to marry. Now, hold on a second. Before we move on from this, I want to point something out. God had forbidden Samson, and all the Israelites of that matter, to marry a Philistine woman. But, what's up with verse 4? You read verse 4? Let's read verse 4. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. So what's that supposed to mean? Was this lady God's first choice? Like, was this in God's original intent and original plan? I don't think so, and here's why. See, God had already commanded and told his people not to marry someone that wasn't from the Israelites, that wasn't from the same religion or background. God had already commanded that. So I believe that this wasn't God's first intention, that God didn't originally desire for Samson to marry this girl. See, the thing we have to understand, God's blessing in your life, God's purpose for your life, it doesn't come out of sin. You can't experience the blessing of God with the intentionality of pursuing sin. It doesn't work that way. And so it's like at the end of the year, as you're struggling financially, and you need that tax income, that tax return. And so you're like, man, if I fudge these numbers, and if I lie about this, or I move this number here, then I'm going to get this money. This must be a blessing from God. No, it's not a blessing from God. God's given you an option. Are you going to man up and obey him, or are you going to continue to follow your own sinfulness? See, God's blessing is never rooted and never comes out of sin. God's never going to ask you to sin in order to receive his blessing. He just doesn't do that. That's against God's character and his nature. He's not going to do that. He's not going to be like, hey, man, go to the strip club, and after you come out, I'm going to let all the money he's going to give him to come to you. It doesn't work that way. God never once blesses through the rooting of sin. But here's the deal with God, though, regarding verse 4. God is sovereign. We serve a sovereign God, a God that is in control 365, all the time. And sometimes I think we forget that. I know I do at times, especially when the end of the month or the beginning of the month when bills come in. I forget God quick sometimes. I'm like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And I forgot that God's been with me this whole time. But you got to understand something, church. God doesn't submit to our actions. God isn't handcuffed to us. God doesn't say, Johnny, I was going to bless you, but you disobeyed, so sorry. God doesn't work like that. Our God's too mighty. Our God's too big. Our God's too strong to be captivated and held slave to us in our actions. In Genesis 50, chapter 50, verse 20, we're told of a story about a guy named Joseph. Remember Joseph, young Joseph? He was a good-looking guy. His brothers were jealous of him. And his brothers said, well, we had enough of you. We're going to kill you. So they took him out the desert and they were going to kill him, but they couldn't quite go through it. So they're like, well, we're going to sell you to slavery. And we're going to tell Dad that you died. So they sold him to slavery. And 15 years go by, many years go by, and he's enslaved, and he becomes a slave and works for Pharaoh's chief, a police kind of guy. and then goes through prison, the dungeon, then all these things happen. And then over God's sovereignty, at the very end of all this turmoil that was going on, Joseph, this slave, became second in command over all of Egypt. The number 2 guy, the vice president, if you will. And then through that, God blessed him with wisdom to save the Israel people, all of them. And so his brothers come in because they're requesting food, and he's like, hey, I know you guys. You don't recognize me, but I recognize you. You're my brothers that try to kill me. Yeah, ta-da, here I am. You know what I'm saying? But you know what Joseph says to his brothers? In verse 20 he says, what you guys intended for evil, God turned it and used it for his glory, for good. And that's what we got to understand. We make poor choices in life. We make stupid choices, guilty. But God is sovereign. God knows what we're going to do before we even think of doing it. And so like a chess master, he sees 30 steps ahead of our step, and he already has it planned out. He knows Samson's weakness. He likes the girls, specifically Philistine girls. And he says, I'm still going to use this to accomplish my purpose. My purpose is going to happen. See, God used our disobedient actions and plans and purpose for his glory. He does that. That's the kind of God we serve. He can use what the enemy intends to cause evil and harm, and he can use it for his glory. With everything going on in Paris, the enemy's using this for evil. But God, he can use this for his glory. And that's what we have to pray, that God would turn this catastrophe and use it for his own glory. Let's look at verse 5 and 7. Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. As they approached the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a lion came roaring toward him. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands as he might have torn a young goat. But he told neither his father nor his mother what he had done. Verse 7, I love this. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and he liked her. I need to stop there for a minute. This vineyard that he found himself in was a very dangerous place for him. Now, for us, we go to vineyards all the time. If you're in California, Napa Valley that way, you go to vineyards, you visit, no big deal. But see, for him, he was a Nazirite. Remember, Nazirites were a completely set-apart people. They couldn't be around alcohol and fermented drinks. It just wasn't it. So going into the dungeons of where fermented drinks come from, it's flirting with danger, man. He's flirting with danger. That's what he was doing. He wandered off, and probably more than likely curiosity got the best of him because he's never been around that before. So he was like, well, my parents are way behind me, so let me just kind of sneak in and see what this is like. That's what we find in college. Once students get to college, they turn away from God. Why? Because now they get to experience things they never experienced before. They have freedom. Now they can drink and nobody knows about it. They can have sex, nobody knows about it. They can do whatever they want, and it's all their secret. And that's what we find with Samson. He goes to a place he had no business even being. So he finds himself surrounded by the grapes, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, guess who shows up? A lion. Now, I think that's crazy. Have you guys, okay, let me throw this out there. It's almost like at night when you sneak out the house, hang out with your friends, you don't want your parents to know, so you sneak out, and then something bad happens, and then you gotta call your parents. It's one of those moments. It's like, I took my dad's car, guys, you can't say anything. And you put it in neutral, you push it out the driveway, start pushing it down the road, turn it on, then drive. And then when you come home, you floor it, then cut it off and coast, and you just coast in there. You guys know. Nope, but I'm just saying, there may have been once or, I'm just saying, that's what I've seen other people do. So here he is, and all of a sudden, he's at a place he shouldn't be, and guess who shows up? Trouble. Trouble shows up. Now, it says in the Bible here that when the lion came, he killed this lion with his bare hands. With his bare hands. That's crazy. That's awesome. Now, it says after he did it, he didn't tell anybody. He didn't tell his mom, he didn't tell his dad. And in verse 7, he just went down and pretended nothing went on. Now, what would happen if you were in that situation? If a lion came up on you and you tore up a lion with your bare hands, probably 100% you were going to tell somebody about it, right? You're probably going to like get that dead lion and like take a selfie with it. You'd be like, yeah! Pick up its head, put it on its back, and be like, you're gonna post it, you're gonna tell it, you're gonna be like, hashtag Walter Palmer killing me some lions. Hashtag sorry, not sorry. Hashtag my superpowers. You're going to be doing whatever you can. You're going to let the world know what you just did because that's incredible. But Samson, he didn't say nothing. Why didn't he say anything? Why wouldn't he want to brag about this? I mean, come on, man. You just killed a lion with your bare hands. And it was easy. Why aren't you telling anybody? Reason why he's not telling anybody, he should have been there in the first place. He had no business being in a vineyard in the first place. He's a Nazarite. It's part of his vow. He's to be completely set apart. But yet he found himself somewhere where he shouldn't even been. It's like America, you know, one of the national holidays that's not a real holiday, but people treat it like a holiday, is opening season from baseball, right? So let's say when opening day rolls around, you know what? They say opening day has the most sick call-ins at work. People always call in sick. It's like, oh, I'm not feeling well. Yeah, it just so happens to be opening day, but I'm really sick. You know, and there's this funny story. I'm going to show you a video. Now, I'm going to show you a video, and it's really fast, and it's kind of hard to hear, so you kind of got to make sure the volume's up, make sure that you kind of pay attention. But before we play it, let me just kind of give you a clue. So this guy that works for the news station calls in sick, and well, just watch the video.
Over to the left, and here's a favorite part of my night. Fox 4 News editor Mark Rodriguez gets the gift of a baseball in the Royals bullpen. This guy called in sick at work tonight. Caught.
So that guy called in sick at work, and he just so happened to get a ball thrown to him, and the camera points right at him. Talking about bad luck. And that's exactly what happens with Samson. He's somewhere he shouldn't even be, and then some trouble shows up. Something happens, and this guy busted. You know, I don't believe it was coincidence a lion showed up. I don't think it was just perchance. I think God orchestrated that. I think God allowed that. Now, here's the reason why I believe that. Usually when we have a major life cataclysmic event that takes place in our life, it causes us to stop and reevaluate where we are, right? Like usually, like if it's losing a job or an unexpected pregnancy, STD, getting busted by police, getting called by a spouse, something of those lines, usually it rocks us. And it causes us to be like, man, how did I get here? How did I get to this place in my life? And so I think God was allowing this lion to show up, to wake Samson up, to say, hey man, I've called you to be set apart. I've called you to live a different life. I've called you to lead my people out of the captivity and the oppression of the Philistines. I've given you great power and giftings, and you're squandering it. Unfortunately, this didn't faze Samson at all. Killing the lion was easy as killing a baby goat, it says. Piece of cake, easy. So he kills the lion with his bare hands, then he runs down to verse 7 to meet up with his parents and get the girl. Just nonchalantly, oh, hey, what's up? Just running behind, that's all. Just like blood on his hand. He's like, no, I'm good. Just nothing. And it says he talked to her and he liked her. See, the most unlikely candidate to lead God's people is Samson. He's always in the places he shouldn't be. He goes to the places he has no business going to. But secondly, let's look at the second one here. He disregards his Nazarite vow. Look at verse 8 through 9. Sometime later, when he went back to marry her, he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass. And in it he saw a swarm of bees and some honey. He scooped out the honey with his hands, and he ate and he went along. When he rejoined his parents, he gave them some, and they too ate it. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. So here we are, sometime later. After they first went down there, after verse 7, he met with them, they went back home. Sometime later, he went back down to meet with the girl and her parents again. And on his way, curiosity again got the best of him. His parents are trailing, he's up ahead. He decides, let's just kind of see if that lion's still there. And he knows he shouldn't even look at it. Why? Because it's a dead body, it's a dead carcass. The Nazarites should not be around or even touch anything that's dead. It's their promise to God, their vow, their oath to God. And Samson knows it. He knows it fully, but he says to himself, let me just look. Let me go see what's going on. Samson has no business, but curiosity gets him, so he goes there and checks it out. Not only does he check it out, he touches it. He touches it. He defiles himself before God. He's fully aware what he's doing. It's not like he just randomly, whoops, I fell into it. He knows exactly what he's doing. It's like, I love this show. You get To Catch a Predator. You guys seen that show, To Catch a Predator? I love that show, man. These guys, they try to prey on these young girls. And so they set up a sting operation. They go to their house. And so the guy shows up. He's like, hey, I'm here. And he's taking his clothes off. And she's like, I'll be down in a minute. And he's getting undressed. Then all of a sudden, Chris Hansen walks in. Excuse me, what are you doing? And then at that moment, it's nothing. Just hanging out. Seriously, what are you doing here? Oh, I just came for video games. I was just going to comfort and talk. Yeah, right. We know why you're here. You're free to leave. And as soon as they leave, the cops bust them. See, it's like Samson. Samson knew exactly what he was doing. He knew what he was supposed to do, but he knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't falling into sin or temptation. He was walking into it obediently. See, I think a lot of times we try to make ourselves feel better, oh, I just fell into sin, or I slipped, I didn't get it. No. Can't play the fool, man. God knows. Samson knew what he was doing, but he chose to do that. Look at verse 10. Now his father went down to see the woman, and there Samson held a feast, as was customary for young men. More than likely, this was the typical Middle Eastern wedding. It was a long process, usually lasts about 7 days, that really involves the family, especially the father of the groom, because the father would be in charge of working out the dowry for this woman, the working out a price of what it's going to cost for Samson to marry this woman. Then after that, there will be a formal engagement, and from that point on, they'll be called husband and wife, but not officially until they consummate the marriage, if you know what I mean, on the honeymoon. So it was a whole engagement process. It's like you got married, and we're going to celebrate and party hard, but it's not going to be official until you consummate the marriage. Now Manoah had reached, which was Samson's dad, had reached some sort of deal with Samson's wife and her parents, and then all of a sudden this huge bachelor party went on. And usually what happens in these types of Middle Eastern parties, alcohol flows like water. It's something that you just do. You drink wine, you get drunk, and you just celebrate. Pretty much custom to today's bachelor parties. And so Samson knows something that he shouldn't be around. And what should not he be around? Alcohol. It's because this is his vow, his promise to God. He was to be completely set apart. But Samson said, you know what? It doesn't matter. It's my special day. I'm going to disobey God. I'm going to do what I want to do because it's about me. See what pride can take you? It can take you places that you're not even supposed to be. Samson knew what was right. He could have said, you know what, guys, I appreciate it. We're going to party, but just no alcohol because I can't be around it. I can't have it. But instead, he's like, nah, but what's a bachelor party without getting drunk, right? So we got to have a good time. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us what engagement he was with alcohol, but I'm pretty confident through everything that happens, he indulged in alcohol. He indulged in wine. I'm sure he did. Samson knew what he was supposed to do, but he chose to do the other. See, Samson's the most unlikely candidate to lead God's people. And here's the third reason why he's the most unlikely. He entertains God's enemies. He's playing around with God's enemies. Look at verse 11 through 13. When the people saw him, they chose 30 men to be his companions. And he says this, let me tell you a riddle, Samson said. If you can give me the answer within 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. If you can't tell me the answer, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. So when Samson went down to marry this woman, he didn't bring with him his own buddies, his own companions. So the Philistines chose people to party with them. They're like, you. It's like a draft, right? Like a first round, Philistines choose from the College of Wayne State, major partier. this guy. And so they're like, all right, there's 30 Philistines now that were chosen to celebrate and to party with them. That's what they were doing. That's all they were there for. But you got to understand something. These people that he was partying with, these are the exact people that God said, I want you to overthrow. I want you to lead my people from out of oppression from. And here he is playing with them, hanging out with them, drinking with them, disobeying God with them. Oops. So Samson's like, hey guys, let's play a game. If you can guess the answer, I'm going to hook you up with 30 undergarments and linens. Basically, it's like from underpants to outer coat. The whole getup, your whole outfit. He's like, if you can guess my riddle, I'll give each of you a complete makeover. And it's going to be an expensive 30 sets. It's going to be very expensive. But he says, but if you can't do it, you hook me up, right? And then the Philistines are like, we got 7 days. No problem, man. We got this. Because they had no intention of paying anyway. They were like, we're going to make this. This guy's a fool. You can't beat me. You can't get this. But the problem was Samson's riddle wasn't just one of those riddles you can look up online. It wasn't those common riddles. It was a riddle that he was gloating about his previous sin. It's a riddle that he was talking about and throwing in front of them in their own eyes, his own disobedience. And this is what he says. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. There is no way on God's green earth no one's ever going to get that. That's like the most vague riddle you can ever. I'll be upset just by the question itself. I'm like, well, you gotta give me a different question, man. That's ridiculous. So only Samson knew it, so 3 days go by, nothing. And then this is when things pick up. This is when things start changing. Look at verse 15. On the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, listen, coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death. Did you invite us here to steal our property? Samson's wife was being blackmailed right then and there. They're like, look, if you don't give us the answer, we're going to kill you and we're going to kill all your family. Because you're not going to rob from us. So this is a problem. Samson's wife was put in a lose-lose situation. You get your husband to give us the answer, or else we're going to burn you and your family to death. There's only one thing she could do. She had to ask. And look at verse 16. Then Samson's wife threw herself on him, sobbing, you hate me. You don't really love me. You've given my people a riddle, but you haven't even told me the answer. I love his response. He's like, I haven't even explained to my mom and dad. So why should I explain it to you? Like Samson mans up. He's like, I don't care. He's like, I don't care what you think. Cry all you want, woman. It ain't happening. I ain't telling nobody this answer. And look at verse 17. She cried, get this, the whole 7 days of the feast. Have you ever been around a crying woman? That's a long time. 7 days of her crying. So on the 7th day, he finally told her, because she continued to press him, she turned and explained the riddle to her people. See, it's funny because Samson could straight up manhandle and lying with his bare hands, but when a woman, his wife, was nagging and crying the whole time, he caved in. That goes to show you this guy's heart. He just couldn't take it. It was driving him nuts. He's like, we just got married. We're not even officially married. The license hasn't even been signed yet. I want to divorce you almost, to the point like it's getting crazy. And then he's like, all right, fine. He tells her. So she takes that answer and goes tells the people. He gives her the riddle. She goes and tells it. Just before the 7th day, they come over and they say, we got an answer. What is a lion and honey? And it was that gut punch. Ooh, they got it. Because Samson had no intention of paying anyway either. And so it was almost like, there's no way you guys should have got that. The only way you should have known that is because you plowed my heifer. And that's literally what he says. You plowed my heifer. He's like, you took advantage of my wife. And so, like, Samson flips out. And he literally flips out. He realizes there's no way he should have known that. It's not having it. So here Samson is playing around with God's enemy, and it finally catches up with him. Church, let me tell you something. Sin will take you farther than you ever wanted to go. It will keep you longer than you plan to stay, and it will cost you more than you're willing to pay. See, playing around in sin, you might not get caught today, tomorrow, next week, next month, or even next year. But eventually it's going to catch up. And when it catches up, it's going to be a low blow and it's going to hurt. And it's going to be devastating. And it's going to be traumatic. That's the nature of sin. That's what it does. And usually what happens, what I find in my life when I sin, is because there's no consequence. And so I'm like, oh, I got away with it. Nobody knows. Cool. I'm going to do it again and again and again and again and again and again. And now this is habitual. Now it's part of my lifestyle. Sin's going to take you farther than you ever wanted to go. It's going to keep you longer than you want to stay. And it's going to cost you more than you're willing to pay. Samson just got caught. He just got busted. And now he has to throw out tons of money because of the foolish choice that he made. Proverbs 16:25 says this, there's a way that seems right to man, but in the end, it leads to death. See, knowing what is right and doing what is right is completely different things. Samson always knew what was right, but his actions didn't follow what he knew. Samson was playing around the enemy and he got burned. See, this is just the third point of why Samson is the most unlikely candidate to lead God's people. And then lastly, proof that he's the least likely candidate is this. Samson has major anger problems. Like seriously, like he has anger problems. And you're going to see this more and more, especially when you get to chapter 15, especially in chapter 16. This guy got anger. He has anger problems. He really does. Look at verse 19. Then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. He went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 of their men, stripped them of everything, and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. Burning with anger, he returned to his father's home. So he's like, I got to pay up. So he goes down to this city far away, a couple cities down. He finds 30 men, and he cold-blooded murders them. And he takes their clothes. He's like, if I got to pay, I don't got the money to pay this. I got to pay my debts. Someone will kill 30 men. So this is God's chosen Savior, God's man to lead Israel. And here he is, burning with anger, goes down, kills 30. And I almost picture it like this, like he gets all these clothes and he shows up to these 30 groomsmen from the Philistines, opens a bag and it's just seeping with blood. Here's your clothes, here's your clothes, here's your clothes. And he passes it out and they're looking at it filled with blood. Talking about a rude awakening. This guy got problems, man. He struggles with anger. He has a short temper. When things don't go his way, he flips out. And not only does he flip out, but he just murders people. That's just what he does. He's like, forget trying to get a loan. I'm just going to go murder people. That's just a whole lot easier. The most unlikely candidate to lead God's people is Samson. It's Samson because he goes to places he shouldn't go, he disregards his Nazirite vow, he entertains God's enemies, and he has major anger issues. I mean, what are we to make of Samson? On the surface, he really does seem like the most unlikely candidate. This guy couldn't be God. He doesn't care about what God's word says. He doesn't care about what his parents have to say. He doesn't care about his Nazirite vow. No drinking alcohol, no touching dead bodies, no cutting our hair. We'll get to that later. He doesn't care about his God-given purpose to lead Israel out of the Philistine army. He doesn't care that he's hanging out with the enemy. He doesn't care that he has anger issues. But here's the greatest shock of all, and it's the second main point I want you to understand from this. And this is very clear. We have to understand this point. The most likely candidate to lead God's people was God's choice. Samson was God's choice. It wasn't his second option. It wasn't his fallback plan. It wasn't his just in case. This was Samson's choice. This was God's choice with Samson. How do we know? There's two things I want to prove that. And the first is this. We see Samson empowered by God's Spirit. I don't know if you caught on that as we read this, but we see that there are times where he does things where God empowers him with his own Spirit. Look at verse 6 of chapter 14. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands. And it was like tearing a young goat. God's power came upon him in that. And 19. Then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. He went down to Ashkelon, struck down 30 of their men, killed them, took their clothes. Where did he get the strength to do that? It was God's power on him. See, it is God's Spirit who empowers Samson to tear apart a lion and allows him to strike down 30 men. Samson may not be the most likely candidate to lead God's people, but he's God's choice. He is. And secondly, we see God uses Samson's sin for his purpose. At the opening of this chapter, we get the story about Samson going down to Tamar and seeing all these Philistine women. And he goes back to his parents, Mom, Dad, I found the woman of my dreams. You got to go get her for me. She's mine. And what did verse 4 say? His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. See, God was determined. God was dead set on saving his people, Israel, from the captivity and oppression of the Philistines. That was his purpose. He's like, my mission, I'm getting my people out of here. I'm setting them free. That's what I'm doing. And he had chosen Samson to do it, and nothing, and I mean nothing, not even Samson's disobedience and poor choices were going to stop God's plan from prevailing. Nothing that Samson was going to do was going to undermine God's overall purpose. See, church, that's good news for us. Because God can use something good out of something stupid we do. God can do something amazing out of our poor choices and mistakes. Each choice that Samson did, it just set off this chain reaction, one after the other, after the other, after the other. Over and over again. It's what we find. Look, if Samson would have never went down to Timnah, if he would have never went down there, he would have never have seen that Philistine woman. He would have never had gone back to Timnah and approached a vineyard. And then he would have never had to kill a lion with his bare hands. And then he would have never had to come back, never would have came back and took the honey out of a dead lion's carcass. And he would have never given the riddle to his bridal party. And he would have never betrayed his own wife. And he would have never needed to have to find 30 cents of clothes. And he would have never had to kill 30 Philistines. And in doing so, begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. It was that one choice of disobedience that led this chain reaction to get him to where he was now, a ruthless, cold-blooded murderer. See, Samson definitely seems like the most unlikely candidate. His actions would definitely make us agree. But also, it would also make us question, God, do you even know what you're talking about? God, do you even know what you're doing? Do you realize this kind of guy? Do you realize who he is? But when we step back and view this whole chapter through the lens of verse 4, it changes everything. See, when we read chapter 14 and we focus just on Samson, we miss the point. Because in essence, it's not even about Samson. It's about Samson's God. It's about a God who loves his people so much that he's willing to use fallen, broken people to accomplish his will. If he would have never went down, all of that could have been avoided. And God could have still used Samson to deliver his Israel in a whole different way. See, when we read about the life of Samson, it's so easy to focus on who he was, his failures, his shortcomings. It's easy to focus on that. But what I want to encourage us to do, whenever you read any story in the Bible, look at it through God's filter. What is God trying to do right then and there? What is God trying to do amongst his people, amongst the nations? What's he trying to teach his people? What is he trying to teach us through this story? We learned last week that God is a God who saves those who are unaware of their need of being saved. And he does it by rescuing us with a baby. But verse 14, or chapter 14 tells us that baby would eventually grow up and be the most unlikely candidate to lead God's people. But he was still God's candidate, still God's choice. Where was Israel's great hope? Samson was a man with great potential, but quickly he becomes a man of great pretending. Did you notice nowhere in chapter 14, out of all the exploits, never once does he pray? Have you noticed that? Never once does he talk with God. Never once does he repent. Never once does he offer a sacrifice because of his sin. Never once do we see that. See, this guy has been gifted with great blessings and giftings and talents. And he's just throwing it away. He's just using his own abilities to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. And the whole time, God is sovereign of saying, I'm not leaving you. And I'm not forsaking you. I'm still going to be with you. Samson was a man born with great purpose, but slowly and surely, he's allowing his God-given talents and giftings just kind of waste away. His life isn't so much about God anymore. It's all about himself. He's a good-looking man. He's strong. He can do great things. Why does he need God? Samson is quickly becoming a prideful, selfish man. Samson has lost his focus. He's become sidetracked and thrown off course from the things of the world that was enticing him. Women, strength, notoriety, selfish indulgence. All these things were just sidetracking him and throwing him off course. Church, I don't know where you are this morning, but God does. He does. Are you allowing the things of this world to sidetrack you? Are you allowing the things of this world to just let you throw away your giftedness? Kind of just throw away your calling in life? Consequences will catch up. They will. Eventually, they do. They always have, they always will. But here's the great thing. Even though Samson had quickly turned away from God with his actions, God still chose Samson for his purpose. Still, regardless. No matter what sin you find yourself in, no matter what situation you're facing this morning, God is still God. He's still on the throne. Jesus is still king. That's not changing because of our actions. God doesn't change his mind like a man does. He's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. It's not too late. Why is it not too late? Because of Jesus. Jesus is the reason why it's never too late. Never once, because he is our only hope. He's the only one that's ever lived a perfect life to take upon himself our punishment from God because of our sins. He's the only one to ever do that, where God will accept it and said, okay, I accept what you did on the cross. Jesus died a horrible death, getting our punishment so that we wouldn't have to. When we completely surrender our lives to Jesus, our weaknesses, it becomes God's strength. Our inabilities become the display case for God to show off his power and might. Our failings, our failures, they don't have to define our lives. They don't have to define our identity. Our past doesn't have to dictate our current and our future. Why? Because of Jesus. Jesus dealt with all of that. He who knew no sin became our sin so that we might become the righteousness of God. You know, this morning, I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying I haven't sinned. I have. But I stand before God this morning as righteous and as holy. Not because I'm the pastor, not because I'm more spiritual than any of you. It's because I place my life and surrender to Jesus Christ. And when you do that, God sees Jesus' righteousness. He doesn't see yours, because ours isn't. We fail all the time. We're a lot like Samson. We don't want to think we are, but we're a lot like Samson. But because of Jesus, God says, yep, you're righteous. You're holy. I want to hear you. I want to be with you. I want to spend time with you. All because of my son. Samson was the most unlikely candidate to lead God's people. And this unlikely candidate was God's choice. See, church, we don't choose God. God chooses us. And he calls us to go and bear fruit that will last. City Grace, Jesus is our only hope. And I hope that can be your only hope.